Let's get started. My name is Ardell Kleinsesser. I'm from the Ollie Leadership Council and your host this afternoon. And welcome to everybody. We have coffee here in the classroom, so please help yourselves. I'd like to also remind you to turn off your cell phones. And also we have these nice notebooks for sale. And they're $10. You have to buy them from a Leadership Council member like myself. Kasia and Stacy cannot take the money because they're state employees. So a lot of us are taking notes. I've seen you writing during class. So it's a nice little notebook. I filled one up just recently, so I was glad to get a new one. Our speaker today is Shane Gerlach. He, in his biography, he describes himself as a father, husband, counselor, founding member, and current director of the nonprofit fan convention, SuperCon. This program is funded by a grant from the South Dakota Humanities Council, an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And his topic this afternoon is Comics Are for Everyone. So please help me welcome Shane. Thank you.
Hi. I am a son to an amazing mother and father. I am a husband to a wife that even after 30 years is too good for me. I am the father of a ridiculously intelligent young man. Both my wife and my son are cancer survivors. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, and I'm a comic book nerd. And I have been for most of my life. Some of my fondest memories as a child is I grew up in Flanders, South Dakota, and it's going to the Rexall drug, and they had a huge comic book rack and then a magazine rack. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and in a small town like Flanders, there was still a barter system, right? So you charge here, at the end of the month we'll balance or not. We'll just carry the books. And my dad had a charge account at the drugstore, and he allowed me to go every Wednesday and charge comic books. And I fell in love with them. And I still do it. They're a way for me to escape. I am a voracious reader. I hope that all of you have enjoyed literature. So I'm going to start with a question. What book do you find yourself going back to? What book is the one that inspires you to read again, that you share with your friends, that you give out?
I say Giants in the Earth.
What is yours, Thea?
Giants in the Earth. Ole Rolbog.
Great book, great book. Anybody else, a book that you love that you would share with someone? That for me, as a kid, it was these. And these you may recognize as comic books. And now we call these floppies because they're kind of floppy. And there's lots of different styles of comic books I'll get into. But I would, that my son's gonna kill me because these are his books, but I would get done at the 5 and Dime at the Rexall at Carrie's Sundries, and I'd slide it in my back pocket, and I'd jump on my Coast King bike with David Crane and Kelly Duncan, and we would pedal down to the Big Sioux River right behind the football stadium. We thought we were the only places that knew about these cool rocks you could sit on, and we would sit and we would read these books, and then we would switch them. Like I got Spider-Man and David had Batman, and we would switch back and forth. And who knows who has what book. Even to this day at 55, we traded books so often. What was cool is it was a connection, and we shared this passion and this love of these characters, but even more so, just that joy of reading together. We played baseball and kickball and basketball, and as we grew, we walked bean fields and threw hay bales together. And we still read comics together every Wednesday, which is the day new comics are released. We found ourselves as we got older driving to Brookings, South Dakota to Doubleday Booksellers or B. Dalton and picking up more comic books. I still do that. Wednesdays is still comic book day. and Rainbow Comics here, or Brookings Comics, and Brookings, I still find myself picking up new copies. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of comic books, and then we're going to get into the genres. So there's so many genres of literature, and I'm going to point out that comic books are for everyone, and I'm going to pair each genre with at least one book. So I want to get into what comic books actually are. Comic books are sequential art. Sequential art is very simply telling stories with pictures. So if we go back, sequential art has been a major storytelling tool for years. Cave drawings, right, were sequential art. Hieroglyphics, sequential art. The political rabble in Roman Empire, painting on the pillars, sometimes very crudely, sometimes very insultingly, early political cartoons perhaps, was sequential storytelling. One of the earliest and most important books of the civil rights movement was the 1957 comic Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Bus Story. And what that comic book that was very accessible, think about who we're speaking to here. We're speaking to African Americans who weren't allowed to have an education. So how can I get that message out of how to act in the face of authority and oppression and racism? A comic book, 1957, not that long ago. We're using comic books to connect and share a message with people who may not have, number one, may not have the money to pick up a book. Number two, may not have the ability to read a book. So, but we can tell them in pictures very simply. So Mr. King's story was shared that way. Here's how we act. Here's how we are non-aggressive and peaceful in the face of adversary, of adversity. This is how we behave when we're approached. That was, a big part. Comic strips, comic books, graphic novels, and trade paperbacks, which I'll go into each one, have become such a big part of the culture. What are your biggest movies that sell are based on these, right? On comic books. And I'm not just talking Avengers or Superman or Batman. A History of Violence that won the Cannes Film Festival is based on a graphic novel. Oh geez, now I just lost the name of it. Tom Hanks Road to Perdition. Beautiful movie about gangsters of the Midwest and the mobs of the Midwest, based on a graphic novel. We have Tony Award winners, which I'll talk about. We have Pulitzer Prize winners, which I'll talk about, all done in sequential art comic books. They are part of our culture that we've embraced. How many of you go past all the rabble in the newspaper and go right to the comic section? Right? A little joy to start your day. Whether it be Family Circus, Garfield. I am a huge, huge fan of Charles Schulz and Peanuts comics. I think that Charlie Brown is the ultimate hero. He never gives up in the face of anything, right? So I'm going to try to kick the football. We learn lessons from the way that we read and we take in knowledge. And science tells us that images with words enhance our memory. If I see something and read it, I'm working on two different stimuli. So I'm firing all those synapses in my brain, but I'm also having an optical a reference point to what's being spoken. So I want to talk about different types of sequential storytelling. The comic strip, obviously, everyone is familiar with. Comic strips have been around newspapers forever. They part of your childhood, part of your adulthood. My father and I used to fight over the Sunday Argus Leader, the comic section, right? Who got that first? And he was always up earlier than I was, so he always got it first. But one of the absolute greatest comic strips was a book by Winsor McCay, a strip by Winsor McCay called Little Nemo. Does anyone remember Little Nemo? Little Nemo is a beautiful, beautiful story about a little boy named Nemo who would fall asleep and have adventures in his dreams and then be awoken suddenly. He would travel to the land of Nod and he would meet the king and he was enchanted by the princess. And there are some uncomfortable parts of Little Nemo because of the time it was written in. So there are some racial stereotypes that aren't very appropriate for this time. This is not Winsor McCay's book. This is a book put out by Locust Moon Press, where they honored Mr. McCay and they asked different artists to interpret Little Nemo's adventures. And you can see very little words. But if you were to follow this along, I'm in bed, I fall out of bed, I move along, and, it's a kraken. Right? We know his adventure, we know his dream he's having without a single word. And we can see the emotion of the child. And we're like, I was scared. I had nightmares. Or I had dreams where I thought of being a clown or a prince or whatever it may be. And some have captions that describe the action. This was one of the first major comic strips that was published. Huge in Europe. There's been a resurgence of Little Nemo recently. There's been new graphic novels because he became public domain. Little Nemo became public domain, so we see a number of new books written about him. If you have Netflix, there's a beautiful animated show called Little Nemo in Slumberland. You can watch with your grandkids or with yourself or with your children. It's beautiful. And it tells a great story about innocence and about imagination. I think we all need a little bit of that, right? A little innocence and imagination is wonderful. The next thing that happened in the comic world, we went from strips, we went to what I referenced earlier, the floppy comic book. When I started collecting comic books, they were a quarter. When my father started collecting comic books, they were 5 cents. So inflation. Comic books now cost anywhere from $2.99 to $5.99 a copy. There is a huge collector's market for comic books. So if your son or daughter left comic books behind, you may be saving on a fortune. Because so many of them, so many collectors and readers were like me, and they rolled them up and they stuck them in their back pocket and they left for college, and dad took them out to the dump and threw them out, right? He doesn't need them anymore, they're gone. These still exist. They're released every Wednesday. These are some of the free comic books. So every first Saturday of May is free comic book day. So you can go to any of the comic book stores. Unfortunately, in South Dakota, we have very few left. Rainbow Comics here in Sioux Falls, at the corner of 41st and Minnesota. A beautiful store in Brookings, South Dakota. If you go up for Nick's Burgers, which I encourage, stop and see my friend Richard at Brookings Books and Comics. He has a beautiful comic shop, but in the back, he has such an eye for books. He has first editions of wonderful books. Yeah, these still come out every Wednesday. People still read them. If you think of these as an episode, it would help. So let's say that I have copy or issue 12, probably the 12th chapter or episode. But people get very intimidated by comic books when they go like, well, I want to start reading them, but that's issue number 1,999 of Action Comics with Superman. Do I have to read the other 1,998 to know what's going on? Who doesn't know Superman, right? Orphan from a destroyed planet comes to Earth and does good for humanity. That's all you really need to know about Superman. So you can pick up any issue and get caught up pretty quickly. I tease my wife, who teases me about comic books, and I tease her about Young and the Restless. So about it. I'm like, honey, you could miss 2 years, and Jack Abbott would still be trying to get one over on Victor Newton, right? So you could miss and still catch up. So don't let the numbering intimidate you. The next big thing that came out with comic books were called trade paperbacks. So if 12 months a year, 12 copies of these come out, and I've been collecting for 50 years. I'm not very good at math, but that's a lot of comics. That's just for one time. So what happened is the publishers went, what if we put the whole series together in a paperback bound edition? So there's 12 issues in one book, the entire run of this particular book, which I'll talk about. But the cool thing is they also do seasons, which I like to call them. So most trade paperbacks can have 4 to 6 issues in it, and that's going to be an entire story arc. And then they'll move on to the next one, and then the next one. So it's like if you were watching an episodic TV show, right? And oh, that storyline resolved. They found the killer, CSI tracked him down. They found the serial killer, and they move on to the next big tragedy. It's no different than comic books. So they started to put those together in trade paperbacks. Trade paperbacks are previously published material bound together in story arcs. The next evolution of comic books was the graphic novel, term you may have heard. A graphic novel is an original story not told previously. The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, which I'll talk about, is a graphic novel. This was not previously published. They just put all of it together in one bound copy. Here it is. You can pick it up, and it's wonderful. Older collectors like myself tend to go towards graphic novels and trade paperbacks due to having a wife with a lot of stuff, a son with a lot of Legos and baseball cards and Nerf guns, and my grandma's knickknacks, her grandma's knickknacks, things that are precious to us. So space limited. So we started to collect more trade paperback and graphic novels, which fit very nicely on your bookshelf. So those are the main ways that comic books are published. Currently, e-readers are huge. Web comics have become really big. And here's why. I don't have to go through a publisher. They're so much cheaper. I can do all the work. I can scan that into it, and I can put that out on a platform and pay a minimal price to have that on a platform like Comixology, which is owned by Amazon now. But there was, in other e-reader platforms where I can just put my work out there and people can read it. Some of them are paid. There's a great writer, Brian K. Vaughan, who's won a number of awards. I'll talk about one of his books. Brian K. Vaughan has a site where he's like, pay what you can. I just want you to read. I just want you to be exposed to these books. So pay what you can. It's so cool. And he probably makes more money that way than he would off of a publisher taking a cut. I mean, he really probably does. Because there's people like me, like this is worth $10, $15. So I'll donate $10, $15. That's what I pay for a book. And he doesn't publish his books. He doesn't bind them. He has on a couple of bigger ones, but generally he doesn't go then and bind his books. They're just there on the e-reader to read. My mother, who's a voracious reader and who I probably got this obsession from, reads all of her books on her Kindle now. Everything on her Kindle. The guy from the library helped her set it up, and she checks out her books and she reads everything from the Kindle. And she said, it's really saved me a lot of headaches because the Kindle doesn't weigh as much as the book when I fall asleep and it hits me in the head. So e-reading has become a very big part of modern comic books. There's one other genre and publishing that I'm not very well versed in, but I'm going to introduce to you. It's called manga, M-A-N-G-A. It's Japanese comic books. They read backwards, and they are very stylized and big, and they are the single biggest seller in comic books today. If you go to Barnes and Noble, you can walk probably 3 sections of just manga comics. Manga comic books are crazy. They have like how to make ramen, where to travel in Japan. My gym teacher is a slime. They have romance. They have a whole genre. And I see people show up to SuperCon dressed as about a soccer team and about the rivalries in the soccer team. Japanese culture loves to celebrate every part of their culture. So they write comic books of all of it. I can guarantee you, it would have to be written by the best, Stan Lee would have to come back from the grave with Jack Kirby to write a book about soccer that would sell in America. And I don't think that's happening, but it's one of the biggest sellers in manga comics. It's Japanese culture is, of course, very huge with younger crowd. My son doesn't read them, but many of his friends do, and they're very fascinated with it. I don't know if I could read backwards. But they do. It's just, they start from the back and read to the front. Not something I'm well versed in, so I want to spend a lot of time on it, but comic strip, comic book, trade paperback, graphic novel, digital comics, and manga are the 6 main areas of comic books. Okay. I'm going to move this up here because if you haven't noticed, I'm a pacer, and I also don't want to turn my back to. I want to keep my place. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of comic books. Maybe comic books over-evaluate themselves a little bit, but they were really, or they're really great marketers, but they define each era of comic books thusly. 1897 to 1938 is known as the Platinum Age. Now that says something. Platinum, the most valuable of the metals. The Golden Age took place from 1938, the first appearance of Superman, to 1954, the introduction of the comic code, which I'll talk about. The Silver Age is sense of theme, platinum, gold, silver. The Silver Age took place from 1956 into the early 70s. The Bronze Age from the 1970s to 1986, an exact year. 1986 was the most important year, even to this day, in comic books. It's also the year I graduated history, or high school, so I feel like they did it for me. And then 1986 forward is known as the Modern Age, and that includes the Dark Age and present day. I'm going to get into all these. So let's talk about the Platinum Age. The Platinum Age of comics was mostly political cartoons and propaganda. The first ever book to refer to itself as a comic book, years and years before comic book became popular vernacular, was The Yellow Kid in McFadden's Flat. That was published in 1897. So let me tie in a little bit of local history to the Yellow Kids. So the Yellow Kids were against, yellow journalism, right? They were little hooligans. I mean, they really were little hooligans. Do you know that that's the original name of our Sioux Falls Canaries? The Sioux Falls Yellow Kids. Years and years ago. Yeah, that was the original name of the Sioux Falls Canaries, was the Sioux Falls Yellow Kids. Then, of course, the most popular I talked about was Little Nemo. Please, find some Little Nemo. You will just be enchanted. Go to your library. Our Sioux Falls Library has so many cool graphic novels you'll be able to check out or get on your e-reader. The Golden Age is the heyday of comic books. In 1938, Action Comics #1 introduced Superman. Kal-El from the planet Krypton, Clark Kent, as he was known on Earth, from Smallville, Kansas. Superman was created by two, I want you to think about the time, 1938. Was created by two young Jewish writers, 1938, who claimed to be creating a super race and a Superman at that time. So two, a little Harrison and I talk about this, two young Jewish writers created a true Superman who stood for truth, liberty, justice, and the American way. I want to talk about counterculture. You want to talk about propaganda, flying in the face of everything that was happening on the geopolitical scale. Let me create this ultimate man who could dominate the world, by the way, but instead used his power for good. Took the lessons he learned from Ma and Pa Kent on a small farm in Smallville, Kansas, and took those to the big city of Metropolis. And whether he was Clark Kent in his suit riding or that iconic, the shirt and the S showing. He was still that small town boy from Kansas. Sure, he'd save the world from Lex Luthor, but he'd also get your cat from a tree. There was a beautiful retelling of Superman's story done by Scottish writer Grant Morrison, with art by the amazingly talented Frank Quitely. It's called All-Star Superman. In this book, Superman is dying. He's had too much exposure to our sun, which gives him his amazing powers. 12 books collected in this. Each book is a new chapter, a new task, a new 12 labors of Superman that he wants to accomplish to ensure peace on Earth before he dies. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. The beginning of it, if I can find this page here, there is let me look here. Apologize, let me flip here. A young girl is standing on a building looking down, contemplating suicide. And Superman flies up to her and just tells her everything's going to be okay. What better way to create world peace than to start with one person and save their life? And of course, I won't find the pictures now. Sorry, I don't want to spend too much time looking for one pen. But it's been used time and time again. It's been used for suicide prevention groups with the permission of DC Comics. So this is a great way to catch up on that. Did any of you watch Superman or read the comics when you were growing up or watch the serials? This is a great way to reintroduce yourself to Superman and Truth, Justice, and the American Way. All the familiar characters there. Perry White, still says Great Caesar's Ghost anytime a story breaks. Lois Lane is there. Jimmy Olsen in his single watch. Lex Luthor, maybe a little bit much like our last president. They're all there. They're all in this book. It's a beautiful retelling of the fable of Superman. And really, that's what most of these characters are, is they're modern day fables, right? So during World War II, comic books were filled with patriotic heroes. Comic books were used as recruiting tools for soldiers. Get on out there and fight the good fight. Go on out there. There was again some problems at the time. There was really well, let's just call it what it is. There was really racist portrayals of Japanese characters, whether they were American or whether they were the aggressor. Now, the comic books were very careful of not showing our US troops and our allies up. They didn't want to write a book where Green Lantern and Superman and Wonder Woman wouldn't stop Hitler and stop the war. So these wonderfully imaginative writers said that Hitler had a demigod, a magician, who cast a spell that kept their powers from working on the front. Because it was important that we not show up our soldiers, that we keep, get your victory garden, go to work in the plants, Rosie the Riveter. We wanted to keep, patriotism at the forefront, and having superheroes go and stop the war. Yeah, there's a great picture, perhaps you've seen it, a great picture of Captain America punching Adolf Hitler right in the face. This was way before Marvel Comics. Captain America was created years and years ago by Atlas Comics, which became Timely Comics, which became Marvel Comics. In 1944, 44% of soldiers read comic books. 44% took comic books into foxholes on the front with them. And why? Beautiful, simple distraction from the horrors they were facing. It's escapism. Why do we watch Survivor or The Amazing Race or CSI or any of those things? It's an escape from what we're inundated with on a daily basis of negative negativity and partisanship, everything else that's happening in the world. We escape through fiction, no matter how it's presented. DC Comics, once again, oh my God, this is such a beautiful story. DC Comics, through rest his soul, author and illustrator Darwin Cook wrote a book called The New Frontier. This is an introduction of all the iconic characters: Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, all those iconic DC characters taking place during the war, all the ways up to the space race, The New Frontier. Many historical characters in this: Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon. So what they did is there's this beautiful telling is they took what if superheroes really existed in that golden era of the greatest generation? What would it look like? What would it really be like? It's such a beautiful story. Wonder Woman freeing women captives in Korea. And they're like, well, what are you doing? That's not what America is doing right now. We're trying to win land. And she's like, I don't care about your politics. I'm doing what's right. You know, is that the way probably that someone who was raised in a utopian society where everyone was equal would act, we hope. Right? So it's just a wonderful telling of, it addresses McCarthyism. You're a freak, you have powers. We're going to call you a traitor. Right? So it's a wonderful book. It won every award that there was in 2007 for comic books. Late 1940s saw the decline of the superhero and the rise of the Western, the romance comic, crime comics, and horror comics. Horror comics caused quite a problem. In 1953, there was a Senate subcommittee called the Juvenile Delinquency. They cited Frederick Welthang's book, Seduction of the Innocent. Horrible book, full of lies and propaganda that said juvenile delinquency is on the rise because of comic books. Let's not look at societal woes. Let's blame 15-cent books that you could pick up at the drugstore. So, comic publishers saw the writing on the wall, and they decided to censor themselves. So they created the Comic Code Authority. No more vampires, no more beheadings, no more blood, no more actual battles, no more. It handcuffed writers. You now had to write a specific way, or the comic code would send your comic back. They thought that portraying, and think about this, we haven't gotten any better really, because all you have to do is think about Harry Potter. They thought that if we portrayed witchcraft and vampires, kids would become witches and vampires. Like it's that easy. Like, and I would read How to Become a Millionaire, and I'd be a millionaire, right? But no, they didn't think about that side. They blamed this on juvenile delinquency. So they couldn't portray vampires, witches, warlocks, warlords, anything like that. It was very strict. And it started to kill the comic book industry. Interesting, 1950s, 65% of comic book readers were women, were girls. Because we went away from superheroes and their underwear on their tights and saving women all the time to romance, crime, drama. And women flocked to it. I find that so, you know what's really interesting? About 58% of our fans for SuperCon, our fan convention here in town, are women. So still, show me something that I can, believe in, something where I'm accepted. Yeah, so that was just a cool number. So the Silver Age, the next age of comic books began with showcase number 4, which introduced the Flash. The overwhelming theme of comic books in the Silver Age was to tell goofy, lighthearted stories. Nothing too political, overt in its nature, nothing, the bad guys got reformed. Who wants a reformed Joker? I mean, that's pretty boring. Hi, Batman, I'm gonna be a good guy now. I mean, good guys are defined by the bad guy, I mean, if I've got the Joker out there giving away Hostess Twinkies to kids, which was a common ad in newspapers, or in comic books, it didn't feel right. So something horrible happened during this time. I love it from a nostalgia standpoint, but for comic books, something absolutely horrible happened. Adam West Batman. Now it's great, but it's hard to take comic books serious when I'm doing the Bat 2C, and I've got Bat shark repellent in my pouch, and I've got Robin doing great Godfrey's ghost, Batman. Kind of hard to take this as a serious literature form when on TV, I'm taking this dark crime fighter, Batman, whose whole career was defined by watching his parents murdered in front of him on Crime Alley after seeing Zorro, which he begged to go to, doing the Bat 2C. Really hard to take literature. Like, what if Gone with the Wind had been, if they'd gone, well, we want to convert this to TV, but we just want it to be a happy ending where everybody gets along and, a little song and dance and, Scarlett O'Hara's like, whatever. Kind of hard to take that book seriously after that. So it was horrible. But then something amazing happened. 1963, a young man named Stanley Lieber was given the reins to a floundering comic book company called Marvel Comics. He and his two partners, Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is called the king of comics. Jack Kirby drew amazingly handsome men and rugged women. He didn't, there was no damsel in distress. His women were getting up off the ground throwing punches. He grew up in the Bronx, and he was a soldier in the war, and he was gritty. And Stan Lee wrote superheroes with flaws. It's hard to relate to Superman. It's not that hard to relate to Peter Parker's Spider-Man, who has to hold a day job so his aunt, who's raising him, doesn't get evicted, who gets bullied by Flash Thompson all the time, who's really nervous about telling Mary Jane Watson that he's in love with her, his next door neighbor. That's a lot easier to relate to, isn't it? Than a millionaire who broods and lives in a bat cave, or a Superman who can fly and solve everything, who can actually fly so fast he can reverse time by spinning the earth around. He also created my favorite characters of all time, the Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four were Reed Richards, Sue Richards, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm. They were four explorers. Reed was a scientist, Sue was a scientist, Johnny was just a hothead race car driver, and Ben was a former military pilot and Reed's best friend. They stole an experimental spaceship, because that's pretty easy, and flew into space and were exposed to cosmic rays and became the Fantastic Four. Alex Ross did a beautiful, Alex Ross, whose work's been the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's had a display at the Smithsonian, probably one of the greatest comic artists of all time. Everything is painted, posed for, photographed, drawn, and then painted. He did a beautiful retelling of the Fantastic Four, recently released a book called Full Circle, and just tells very simply in one story, in one book, the entirety of the Fantastic Four. It is absolutely beautiful. And he did it to honor Jack Kirby. So the big bright colors and over stylized. He does very realistic renderings as well. This one he wanted to honor that time of 1963 to about 1970. So he did this beautiful, beautiful drawing, this beautiful book called Fantastic Four Full Circle. Highly recommended. The Bronze Age began to reflect the rapidly changing social revolution that was happening in our country. Civil rights movement. All of a sudden there were Black superheroes. Now, they didn't need to say black in front of everybody's name, but oftentimes it's Black Cat, Black Panther, Black Lightning. Did we need, I mean, you probably could come up with better names, it's like, if they would have, Aquaman, well, obviously he does things in water. So some of these things were very simplistic, but I don't think but all of a sudden there were Black heroes. And that was important. It was very important for a young African-American man, I imagine, to go to his local comic book store that they didn't exist then, but to go to his Five and Dime and see his face represented by a hero. That didn't happen before then. We also saw the Comics Code kind of lighten a little bit because writers got smart. They're like, you told me I can't have witchcraft and I can't have vampires, but what if I make the Tomb of Dracula, and Dracula is actually a super villain. He's not a vampire. He has a blood disease that made him crazy and act like this. What if I created a mutant called the Scarlet Witch, whose power is to cast spells? See, pretty smart thinking. So the Comics Code started to lighten. It also started to lighten because underground comics started. In San Francisco, of course, right? It's where all the great music came from at the time. Fillmore, the Allman Brothers, Jefferson Starship, our Jefferson Airplane at the time. Everything kind of cool was coming out of that area, and underground comics started, and they were just notebook paper stapled together to start and sold for a nickel or given away at record shops and head shops. The Fabulous Freaky Brothers, cartoons, which were cartoons about cars and auto heads, and there was a number of them. And they said, I don't have to follow your code. I don't have to follow it at all because I'm not published by your companies. So that really started to loosen up because the big publishers, Marvel and DC, saw this groundswell and they're like, I'm going to lose money. Well, no company likes to lose money. So we'll loosen the Comics Code a little bit. So you began to see more realistic portrayals of life again. 1986. 1986 ushered in what's called the dark age of comics. Comics became much more guttural, visceral, violent, and maybe too realistic for some. Where I said comics were an escape. What if they weren't? What if they were a reflection of what's happening that you see every day? There were 4 amazing books that were published in 1986. I'm going to talk about 3 of them right now. We'll talk about one coming up. First one was The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. Dark Knight Returns takes a beaten and broken Bruce Wayne, all those years of fighting crime. He comes back to fight again because his old nemesis, the Joker, comes back. But it also, Reagan is dictator for life. He changed the Constitution while he was president. And of course, he's on the precipice of nuclear war. It's a nuclear war countdown. There is Batman. They've outlawed superheroes. So Batman is breaking the law by coming back. So Superman, who now works for the United States government, has to bring Batman in. So best friends. It's a dark, beautiful story. It's called the best Batman story of all time for a number of reasons. The new Robin becomes a female. There's Superman stopping the troops from coming up from South America and Mexico into America, Russian troops. So it was very political. Think about 1986, and Reagan was in full charge. Superman to stop a nuclear warhead headed towards America. What was that great TV movie that they did that scared the crap out of all of us about nuclear war, a nuclear bombing in America? Do you remember that from about that time frame in the 80s? It was a TV movie, and I just remember being a kid and scaring the crap out of me, like what's going to happen, This is a beautiful story, beautiful story. That one came out. I'm going to skip this one to go this one. Crisis on Infinite Earths came out. Crisis on Infinite Earths took that silly Batman and that silly Superman and You know, remember when Superman was supposed to be the last survivor of Krypton? Turns out he wasn't. There was Supergirl, there was Superboy, there was Super Dog, there was a Super Horse, there was Fritzy or Sparky, the Super Cat that hung out with Supergirl. Oh, yeah. There was like 4 different Flashes. There were, because a writer would write it one way and another writer in different timeline. How can they still be alive? It was 1930s, it's now 1986. How are they still 20 years old? So what they said is there were alternate Earths. That story happened on Earth 12, and that story happened on Earth. So what they did is they took everything and they put it all together. And what was really, really stunning about this book and what turned kind of the world on its end was heroes died. Flash died. Supergirl died. Heroes lost. You didn't find many books. And as a kid, when I'm buying this, you know, by month, and it was like May, Superman holding Supergirl in his arms, and she's dead. And you're like, well, in June, she'll be just fine, right? Superman will fly around the earth and turn time, everything will be okay. Supergirl was dead. When the Flash died 2 issues later, I'm like, yeah, but Barry Allen will be back. He can tap into the Speed Force. He can. Nope, Barry Allen was dead to save our planet. This was a game changer. Again, real consequences for actions. So the Dark Ages. And then, God, I'm going to say this too much. Maybe the most important comic book ever written to that point was a book called Watchmen. Who watches the Watchmen? Who watches those who put the rules over us? Who watches the politicians? Who watches the businessmen? Who holds those in power accountable? This is a book written in the real world by a mad genius named Alan Moore. Alan Moore is a British writer. He's won every award you could imagine for his sequential art and for his fictional prose and for his he wrote about Aleister Crowley, an autobiography about Aleister Crowley, a number of different books he's written about witchcraft and about its influence on London counterculture. So what he wanted to do with this book is he wanted it to be Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman. He wanted it to be, they said, no, you can't do that, what you're gonna do with our iconic characters. So DC Comics went out and bought Charlton Comics, which was, they had comics, the Blue Beetle, who was a science adventurer, Peacemaker, who was a soldier of the Korean War who came back very jaded and decided to take it out on criminals. Like, you can do whatever you want with these characters, but not our babies. So he wrote this beautiful story about superheroes taking power onto themselves. Who watches the Watchmen? We have the power. We're going to show you the right way to do things. Maybe absolute power brings absolute corruption. And I don't want to spoil too much. This book was named one of the 100 best novels of all time. Not graphic novels, not comic books. One of the 100 best novels of all time by Time Magazine. It is taught in philosophy classes, in government classes, on college campuses across the country. It is a beautiful story about what power does and what it can do. There's a great movie version of it out that comic book fans hated because it didn't go deep enough, but it would have been like 6 movies. It would have been like Lord of the Rings, 3-hour, 3 movies to get into just the depth of this. And what's really cool about this, about what Alan Moore did, is Alan Moore also wrote prose at the end of every chapter of every book. So there's a book going on that talks about what's happening, but based in Roman time. Also, there's a character in here who's reading a comic book that talks about, it all ties in. It's just, it is metafiction. It is layer upon layer of characters being aware but yet not aware. Is beautiful. Highly recommended. So comics got a little bit dark during that time, during the Dark Ages. Dark Ages also at that time brought about the rise of the graphic novel. Remember when I said comics won Pulitzer Prizes? Have any of you read Mouse? What an amazing book. What an amazing book. We've got, remember what Hitler thought about Jews? They were vermin. So what does the writer represent Jews as? Mice. And what are mice as natural predators? Those are the Nazis. And what are the Poles who betrayed the Jewish people? Swine. It's an amazing book. Pulitzer Prize winning comic book. That changed the playing field for every writer after that. If you haven't read it, please read it. You can get it at any library. And you know what makes this book really cool? It's been banned a lot, so you know it's good. Anytime they try to keep knowledge out of our hands, reach for that knowledge. Dark Age also brought on a lot of independent creators. Image Comic, Dark Horse Comics, Top Cow. There were different publishers popping up because comics were so popular. But one thing happened. Marvel Comics was going broke. Marvel Comics was going broke. They actually sold the rights to Spider-Man to Sony Pictures. They sold the rights to the Fantastic Four to Fox. They didn't even have the rights to make movies of their own characters because they were going broke. They were going so broke that they went to a crime noir writer named Brian Michael Bendis. And Brian said, my dream has been to write Spider-Man. And they said, what do we got to lose? Write Spider-Man. Ultimate Comics, Ultimate Spider-Man took Peter Parker's story and set it in 2000. Not 1963, 2000. It sold more copies than any comic. Number one, sold more comics than any other comic had to that point. And it completely changed everything because remember when I talked about the numbering? This was number one. I could start with Spider-Man right from the start. If I'm a 14-year-old boy in 2000, I can read about a 14-year-old boy who gets bitten by a radioactive spider and has powers. And what's amazing to me is Brian was in his 30s when he wrote this. He didn't have children, but I was working with young people at this time in my field. This reads like young people talk. This reads like a high school. This reads like real life. I think that's what resonated with so many readers about this because the Spider-Man story, the Spider-Man mythos is wonderful. But if I can start at number one and it's now modern telling, well, they made so much money off of this that they went to another Scottish writer. There's a lot of Scottish comic book writers. I don't think there's much to do in Scotland except for read comics. And they created the Ultimates. The Ultimates is what you see if you ever saw the Avengers movies. This is a modern day retelling of Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and it is absolutely beautiful. All of a sudden, Nick Fury looks like Samuel L. Jackson. They cast Samuel L. Jackson because that's what the artist, John Cassidy, used as his reference for Samuel Jackson, or for Nick Fury. Let me see. Yeah. That was a drawing way before they cast Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. There's a great scene in this where Betty Ross, who's Bruce Banner's girlfriend, is having lunch with Brad Pitt and Hulk gets jealous. Doesn't end well for Brad Pitt. So Marvel ended up making a ton of money on that. It saved their publishing company. And the Avengers weren't a big deal. I mean, I loved the Avengers, but it was never a great selling comic book. Iron Man, who, you know, saved Robert Downey Jr.'s career from drug addiction and became, you know, 3 movies in, and he became the iconic character of the Avengers films. Iron Man was a 3rd-rate superhero in comics. I don't know anybody who went, I can't wait for the next issue of Iron Man to come out. But this changed all of it. That retelling in a modern era, the cusp of technological changes, making his armor AI and everything was so cool. And it carried over very well to film. They made a lot of money off that stuff. Established heroes like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Spider-Man, they all made huge comebacks during, as we moved out of the Dark Age into the present age. And one of the cool things that they did after Brian Bendis had such success writing is they went to people like Stephen King, Brad Meltzer. They said, hey, you want to write a comic book? Like, I really want to write a comic book. I am 45 years old and I grew up reading comics. Yes, I want to write a comic book. And they started giving comic books to established writers and let them play in the playground and do 12 issues. Do 12 issues. Bryan Singer, wonderful film director. They said, would you like the X-Men? And he said, yes, I would love the X-Men. And he wrote 12 issues, 1 season. They collect it, they sell it, and beautiful. So they started to look at kids my age, grew up with comic books, wanted comic books back. So they gave them to them. They loosened the reins a lot and let new people play with their toys. And it really energized the comic book world. Brad Meltzer, I don't know if you've read any of his political thrillers, a great writer, but he did an amazing job with Justice League. Okay, now we've talked about comic books. I want to talk about how they're for everyone. I'm going to talk about some genres. You're gonna get through this. Thea, you tell me when I have to shut up. Children,
We're good.
think about it. Dr. Seuss. So those were great, by the way. Man's a philosopher. Go back and read Dr. Seuss as an adult. Whole different image. You may not be where you want to be, but look at how far you've come. Has a lot of different meaning when we get a little older, doesn't it? Just because you always have doesn't mean you always have to. You know, a little different meaning. But you know, think about kindergarten teachers showing the pictures to their kids. This was one of my son's favorites. There's a whole line of books. It's called Good Night, Darth Vader. And there's a whole line of books where they took the Star Wars characters. And this particular one, Darth Vader has a real hard time getting his twins, Luke and Leia, to go to bed. So let's read us a story, Dad. So he reads them a story, and they are just beautiful, beautiful books. But young readers, and I think it's very important for parents to engage young people very early in the beauty and power of reading. It's where knowledge lies. So this was one I picked for children's literature. There's a ton of others. Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus, Piggy and Elephant. Those are wonderful. Where the Wild Things Are was the first book I bought my son. First book I bought my son. He wasn't even born yet. I bought him that and a baseball bat and a Yankees t-shirt. He wasn't even born yet. The day we found out we were having a son in this program, I bought those 3 things. Middle grade readers. Middle grade readers, very important time for reading. Brains developing at a rapid pace. Dopamine's firing like crazy. Imagination like crazy. Why not focus that energy? Why not focus that imagination? As a young boy, my favorite young reader's book that Clara Hedrick, my 3rd grade teacher, handed me, not this particular book, that book's been destroyed, Tintin. Tintin, does anybody remember Tintin? Tintin, yeah. Tintin was a boy reporter with his little dog Snowball, who went all across the world finding adventure and trouble and using his smarts to outwit the bad guys. As a young boy, watching a young boy overcome Nazis and jewel thieves and pirates, and he went over the whole world. I have the whole collected series of these. There's 16 books. Tintin in America, the Cigars of the Pharaoh, and the Blue Lotus happen to be collected in this one. I love this series. This is a great series to give your, I hope I'm not being offensive to anyone of your grandsons or your granddaughters. Great. And I want to say that anybody that have young children at home, I'm 55 and I have a 16-year-old, so things happen. Amulet, wonderful, wonderful series. Female hero, young girl whose grandfather, who she was closest to, dies. And she finds an amulet in his things. That amulet transports her to another world where she becomes the heroine. Kazu Kibushi writes this. He's out of Seattle. I had the wonderful opportunity to interview him. He's just a beautiful man. And what he saw as he had children was there wasn't books out there that he felt comfortable giving his children. He says, I'll write one and draw it. It just finished. There's 9 books in the series. You can pick up the whole 9 at Barnes & Noble. Beautiful, beautiful series. Great art, great stories, great action. Just enough to get a young heart be good, you know, but not so much that it's going to push them, you know, cause trauma. We don't want to traumatize young readers. Next book is my son's favorite series. It's called Hilo. My son got sick at 10 years old with cancer. Some of my comic book friends reached out to their friends and said, hey, there's a young boy who's sick. And Judd Winnick sent the first copy to my boy. That was this boy who crashed it. You should see my boy when I went into his room and took things off his bookshelf. He bought me to check him out. Check him out. Hilo is about a little boy who falls to earth and loves burps and farts and soda pop. And for some reason, he thinks that kiwis are the best fruit ever. But what happens when a young boy falls to earth is the government wants to find him. Well, his friends that he makes protect him. And it's, oh my God, So Judd Winnick became famous on The Real World, season 1, in San Francisco. I think that was season 1. He married a gal who met there, Pam, who's a doctor at Portland, one of the hospitals. And one of the other friends on that series was a young man named Pedro, who was HIV positive and passed away. And to deal with his grief, Judd, who was writing ads at the time, wrote the book Pedro and Me, about his friend and his courage in the face of HIV. And then he wrote Batman. He wrote a number of comics, and much like Kazu, his kids got old enough and said, yeah, we want to read your books. He's like, shucks. My books aren't meant for young kids. So I'm going to write a book that is. This is just an amazing story. This has the stamp of approval from the boy who read it from 10 to 16. The last book just came out last week. And I don't know how many of you get to hang out with 16-year-olds, but if you get a 16-year-old to sit quietly and read a book and not be on a video game or his phone or his social media apps, it's got to be pretty good. Next, one more. Let me go to one more for the young. It's a young man out of Iowa, right outside of Des Moines. His name is Eric Gapster. Eric came to the very first SuperCon. At that time, he was just inking comic books, not just. So comic books are, you know, drawn, and then some artists ink their own work, some ink and color their own work. But Eric was an inker, so people would do the rough drawings and then he would type them up and draw them. Eric had a dream of creating an all ages comic book. Well, this is a book about Wyatt. And Wyatt is 10 years old, and one day he goes to kick a kickball and it keeps going and going and going. And he goes to run after it and he jumps and suddenly he's flying. Wyatt has powers and he's 10 years old and he's dealing with the grief of his mother dying and only having a father. and not sure what to do with all those feelings. So he does what any 10-year-old boy would do. He breaks a lot of stuff, gets in a lot of trouble, and finds out how much family really means. This is the first book, and Eric just came out with the second book last year, and we gave away 1,000 copies of it at SuperCon to young readers, thanks to the South Bend Humanities Council. The next genre is young adults. Young adults 12 to 16. One of the most popular books out there right now is written by Cami Garcia. And Cami Garcia, DC Comics went to her. She wrote an amazing young adult series of books. Golly, I can't think of the name of them. Beautiful Things, Beautiful something. I've never read them. They're very stylized and romantic. And let me see if I can find the name of them. The lovely, Beautiful Creatures is her series. And they were a big hit with teen girls, huge hit with teen girls. So they said to Cami, do you want to write comic books? And Cami said, I would love to write comic books. So they said, would you like to write the Teen Titans, teenage heroes? And she said, I love to write the Teen Titans. New York Times bestseller, every one of them. Started with Beast Boy, then went to Raven, then went to Robin. 3 books in so far. The next book comes out this summer. It'll be called Starfire. Really, really good, guys. Really puberty and change and love. No one understands me, and angst and everything that teenagers go through. And then the powers are secondary. New York Times bestseller. Every one of them that's come up. Comic book, by the way, New York Times bestseller. This is one of my prized possessions. Illustrated and written by 2 men out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ryan Wood and Ryan Kelly. I got to meet Ryan Kelly. Ryan drew this inside my book for me. Ryan Kelly is his name. He's the artist of this book. Local is about a teenage girl, a victim of abuse, of a broken home, who hates her life. So she leaves home. And it's 12 chapters. 1 year of writing, and in each chapter, she's in a different town as she tries to find out who she really is. So one town, she sells tickets at a movie theater, and she's created this persona, right? And one, she's a waitress, and this is who I want to be. It's smart. It is so smart. It deals with, where do I fit in? Who am I? Where do I belong? I checked this book out from the Yankton Library so many times to give to my youth group that the Yankton Library bought me my own copy. Book is called Blankets. Everybody in here grew up in the Midwest? Have any outsiders? Teen youth groups, teen church, relationship with God, Lutheran church, Catholic church, whatever it was, lock-ins, hay-rides. Oh, I'm in love, but does God want me to be in love? And, what do I do? Do I go to hell if I kiss? What's happening? This takes place in Wisconsin. This is the most realistic adaptation of Midwest life I have ever read outside of church basement ladies. This is a beautiful, beautiful book of teen romance, of family dynamic, of questioning faith, of finding faith, of defining who you are. It's called Blankets. It's by Craig Thompson. It is, I would give this to if I was a rich man, every teenager in the Midwest would be gifted this at their 13th birthday. That's how powerful this book is. It is beautiful, and it's so important, and it won multiple awards, and it's been banned a lot as well. A lot, especially in Wisconsin where he's from. Yeah, we don't like talking about things like that. How dare we question faith? Adult fiction. Adult fiction, let me give you an idea. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo would be adult fiction. So very stylized, but maybe not so realistic. One of the most important books that came out in the last decade is by Emil Harris. It is called My Favorite Thing is Monsters. Emil Harris is paralyzed. This book took her 7 years to create. She would have to prop up her hand to do the artwork. The artwork is all done with a ballpoint pen. The lettering is all done with a felt tip marker, not computers, not fancy paints or anything. And it's all done on notebook paper. 7 years to create this book. I'm so excited for the sequel to come out this year. It takes place in Chicago. It's a young girl with an overactive imagination who is sure that she can solve a crime that may not actually be a crime. Someone in her apartment complex dies, and she's sure something is up. And she sees herself, her mother is beautiful, right? And she's a little awkward. So oftentimes the portrayal of herself is she draws herself as a werewolf. You know, mom is beautiful, and every other woman is ugly in comparison. And the lead character will often draw herself as a werewolf or an ogre because I'm ugly and I can't live up to my mother's standards. So this is a great book. Again, often banned, many awards. Another version of adult fiction is, am I there? Where am I? Oh, I skipped it right here. I have given away 12 copies of this book. I have bought it and given it away to my friends. This is called Punk Rock in Trailer Parks. I grew up in Flanders, South Dakota. That should say enough. This takes place in the 80s. This book is written by a writer known as Derv. Derv was a classmate and best friend of Jeffrey Dahmer. There's a great movie and book. There's also another graphic novel that I didn't bring because I currently have it loaned up called My Friend Dahmer, where he talks about growing up with Jeffrey Dahmer. A great movie also based on that graphic novel. But this one is fun. This one takes place in Akron, Ohio, where Devo came out of, and the Pretenders, and some really cool rock and roll. But honest to God, this could have been written in Sioux Falls at the Pomp Room. This is a really cool book. And me and all my friends that love comic books and rock and roll and muscle cars and all that, this is a great book. Jack Kirby, I talked about him earlier. Jack Kirby created some really cool characters, and one of them, his name was Scott Free, Mr. Miracle. Tom King is a former intelligence officer for the U.S. Army. Tom King has become the single most successful comic book creator of the last decade. Tom King went to DC Comics and said, I would like to write a book about Mr. Miracle. And they're like, nobody knows who Mr. Miracle is. He's like, I would like to write a book about Mr. Miracle. Post working as an intelligence officer, Tom worked with soldiers with PTSD. Scott Free, Mr. Miracle, is an escape artist. So used as an allegory of what we're escaping. It opens with an attempted suicide and goes from there into stories about war and love. And am I worthy of being a father? What am I really trying to escape from? Am I trying to escape from my past, my awful father, love, the fear of fatherhood, the trauma of war? This is a great book, and the art is super cool. Anytime Scott starts to get too close, he glitches. Nope, I have to run. I have to escape. So there's this glitch, and this is a big glitch. Oftentimes it's just one panel, but that particular one is a really, really big glitch. That's the one right after his child is born. I mean, he's like, I need to run. I'm no good. I am a crappy father. I'm going to be a crappy father. It's a powerful book. Tom's written a ton of great books, often dealing with war and trauma. And he wrote a book for DC Comics called Identity Crisis. And the Trinity, which DC Comics, the Trinity is Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman. they created a place called Sanctuary just outside of Smallville, Kansas, where superheroes can go and seek counseling. And that book was crapped on because people didn't want to see their heroes like that. Batman doesn't need therapy, he just punches his way through problems. I love that book. It sold really poorly. The first issue sold through the roof because like Tom King doing superheroes. And then it would be, Tom King's not writing superheroes, he's writing me. And I don't want to read about my problems. So it would be a great book. Realistic fiction is the next genre. Jason Aaron was in Kansas City. This book called Scout, there's, this is book 1 of 10. This takes place on the Prairie Rose Indian Reservation in South Dakota. There's no Prairie Rose Indian Reservation in South Dakota, but there is a Pine Ridge. I grew up in Plainview. I worked at the Siouxland Big Pro Boys and Girls Club in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. This is real, folks. This is poverty and drug use. And the only thing more corrupt than tribal politics is church politics. And it deals with tribal politics. It deals with money. It deals with alcoholism and drug abuse, crooked cops, AIM, all of it. It is very adult. Very adult. Lots of violence, lots of sex, lots of like I wouldn't take this book in my treatment group and go read this because there's active IV drug use and it's brutal and it's wonderful. It's an amazing book. The next book, I talked about Alan Moore. This is another realistic fiction. This book is called Providence. Are any of you familiar with the works of H.P. Lovecraft? H.P. Lovecraft, very important writer in British, but he wrote about early America, but he wrote about it in a mythical way, like America was supposed to happen. And maybe the gift of America was also a curse. So what Alan did in this is he explores H.P. Lovecraft's writing and about Providence, Rhode Island, where he did a lot of his research from. And it's dark. It's dark. Lots of people of the time, lots of literary figures, lots of political figures are represented in this. This is a hard book to describe, and I love it. I absolutely love this book. The next one is literary fiction. Literary fiction often includes political criticism, social commentary, and reflections on society. One of the single most brilliant books that I've read about religion, humanity, the cult of personality politics, currently everywhere, consumerism, and the effects of war, was written by writer Mark Russell. Y'all are gonna laugh when I show it to you. The Flintstones. DC now owns the rights to Hanna-Barbera comics or properties, so they can create comics about it. They tried and nobody wanted to read them. So Mark said, "Can I have it?" And what this is Fred Flintstone coming to realize that just like they took over for pre-Magnum Man, he's going to be replaced too. And what do we do when we feel like we're going to be replaced? We grip tighter. So remember what was it, the Moose Lodge or the Water Buffalo Lodge? And he makes that, he is the trump of Bedrock. He makes that his standing point. He makes that his cult personality. He makes that his religion. He makes that, I've got a dupe in Barney Rubble, he'll tell him how great I am. It is a scathing view on modern politics, religion, and consumerism. The next book in literary fiction is called Essex County, written by Jeff Lemire. Jeff Lemire is a Canadian writer. Divorce, family betrayals, holding on to the past. Why did my brother get more of the inheritance than I did? Why did my brother get the family farm while I worked as a janitor? And a little boy whose parents die and is thrust into that family drama generations old. It's a beautiful book. It's a trilogy, and all three are collected in this. There's 3 different parts. Highly recommended. Anything by Jeff Lemire, highly recommended. He'll come up again here shortly. The Many Deaths of Layla Starr. Many Deaths of Layla Starr is written by Ram V. He goes by that because I couldn't pronounce his last name. He is a man of Indian, not Native American, Indian descent. So what if we hit a point where we can't sustain life on this planet anymore? What if we outgrow the resources that are available? I don't know if you know anything about Indian culture, but they have a god or goddess for everything. But what they do is they're like, death, you're not doing your job. And death is like, yeah, but I kind of like them. So the other gods kill death and have her reborn as a human. And she keeps trying to get back to tell them the magic of humanity. And Layla Starr is death. And she is flawed, she's stupid, she's wonderful, she's loving, she's great, and the gods keep killing her every time. So at the end of every chapter, the many deaths of Layla Starr. It's a wonderful book, wonderful book. Next type of genre is mystery. Any mystery readers here? One of the most popular genres out there, right? Mysteries sell. Mysteries sell lots. Well, I've got 2 really cool mysteries I want to share with you. First one is, again, by what am I gonna? I'm gonna have to read here because I just said his name 3 books. Alan Moore. Oh, so back to the Man Who Created Washington. He's a great writer. So, do you guys know what public domain is? Public domain is when a character no longer has copyright on it. Did y'all know that Mickey Mouse is now out in the public domain? Yes. As well as Winnie the Pooh. And they made a horrible, I had to watch it. They made a horrible horror movie about Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, no, it's really bad. Don't waste your time. But what Alan Moore did is he's like, what if I took Captain Nemo, the Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll, Alan Quartermain, and Mina. Mina was the first bite of Dracula in the book. She's immortal. And I made them a task force for the British Empire. It's really good, guys. It is really good. So in this particular one, they face one of the great literary villains of all time, Sherlock Holmes' nemesis, Moriarty. Yes. In the next, there's 8 total of this. In book 2, they fight the aliens from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. So Alan Moore has a lot of fun. What's really cool about this book too is they write, if I can find here, at the end of comics when I was a kid, and if you read any floppy comics when you were a kid, they always had ads at the end of them. Well, he puts, little ads in the back of each book, just like when he was a kid reading them. And those are really fun to read just to see how, and I was such, dude, the Disney film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I was such a Captain Nemo fan. I thought that was, so this one was fun for me. This one is called King of Nowhere. It's by W. Maxwell Prince, who W. Maxwell Prince writes teen horror. There's a thing out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of Twilight. I mean, teens love horror. But he wrote this great comic book. This is about a chronic alcoholic who wakes up in a world he's sure he's hallucinating. of anamorphic creatures. So the sheriff is a beaver, it's a beaver head, but he wakes up in this world, sure, he's hallucinating, to a murder. And of course, he's the main suspect because he doesn't look like them. He's actually human. Fun book, great thriller, really enjoy it. The next genre is fantasy. Any fantasy fans here at all? Oh, thank you. Yes, yes. Of course, Lord of the Rings, the iconic fantasy book. This book is called Bone. Bone is the story of the three Bone brothers, Phony Bone, Foam Bone, and Smiley Bone, who fall into an enchanted world, and that's trying to be taken over by a dark force. This is that quest. You know, we all love the quest. Will they make it? You know, Lord of the Rings. Will they make it? Will they get the ring? Will they make it to Mordor? Will they drop the ring in the fire? This is a quest, and it's Scholastic Book of the Year, given to classrooms and libraries across the country. Scholastic invested in this. Jeff Smith self-published this until a publisher noticed and went, "Can we publish you?" So it is simplistic and funny. The issue, the Great Cow Race. So he falls in love with, Bone falls in love with Briar, who's just a beautiful, beautiful farm girl. She also happens to be, the key to the story. But she lives with her grandma, and grandma every year does a cow race. She races the cows. So it's just a blast. You should read it. Neil Gaiman, Sandman, wonderful stories. I picked this particular one because this was a game changer. This has a Midsummer Night's Dream in it. One of the main characters of Sandman is Dream, who visits you during your dreams, the Sandman. And he gave Will Shakespeare his ideas. This won the World Fantasy Award, and the other writers were so pissed that they banned comics from ever winning it again. Yeah, they got together right after Neil Gaiman won, and they're like, "This can't happen again." That's a comic book. Great series, also on Netflix currently. We go rapid fire here. Fables. Fables, what if all the fables that you grew up with, Sleeping Beauty, Big Big Wolf, Jack Horner, Little Boy Blue, lived in their own neighborhood in New York City. This is wonderful, wonderful series written by Bill Willingham, who lives right outside of Rochester, Minnesota. New York Times bestseller, was ripped off by CBS for the show Once Upon a Time. Jerks. I got to meet David Peterson. David Peterson wrote the book Mouse Tales. Absolutely beautiful illustrations. I think he did a drawing for me in this one. I don't remember, but anyway, he so it's another quest story, but told through the eyes of mice. And it's beautiful. There's 6 series in it. Peter Panzerfaust, historical fiction is my next one. Peter Panzerfaust takes the Peter Pan mythology and puts it in World War I. So all the characters that you love, Peter Pan, Wendy, Tiger Lily, Hook. Hook is a horrible German officer. Peter Panzerfaust. So they're soldiers and they're fighting for freedom. Remember I told you they had Hanna-Barbera? Snagglepuss exits stage left. Remember Snagglepuss?
No.
This book is about McCarthyism. What if Snagglepuss, super popular character, was a closeted gay pink Sabretooth?
Oh,
Mark Russell, great book. Horror, super popular genre. I have a ton of horror books at home. I brought this one, it's current, it's called Something is Killing the Children. You know, the boogeyman that we all create when we're kids. What if that was real? What if our imagination actually brought those to life? And what if The Order of St. George was even nastier than the monsters we create and protected us when we didn't know it. The next genre is thrillers. Mind Management, Mind MGMT, is about a writer who all of a sudden, everything she writes starts to happen around her. She doesn't realize that she was experimented on by the government. And there's a whole bunch of others out there like her. And there's one man who's broken his programming and he's out to get all the rest of them. Lots of fun. Two quick books here. Way before the pandemic. Why the Last Man was written. What if one day every single male on earth died? Except for Yorick Brown and his pet ampersand, little monkey. Everyone would want a piece of Yorick Brown and his pet monkey. Why didn't you die? We want a cure. Not only why didn't you die, but how are we going to repopulate the earth? Great book. Sweet Tooth. What if one day we woke up and anamorphic, like, gave birth to a boy that was part deer? Oh my gosh. And what do really, really jerky men in power do when they see something different from them? They try to destroy it. This is by Jeff Lemire, who I talked about earlier. Westerns not as popular anymore from any literature standpoint or even comics. East of West takes the Western genre and tilts it on its head. A lot of fun. I just say that out loud. It's not fun at all. It's actually dark and awful and but great reading. A gunslinger against the Four Horsemen of Death, set in the Old West. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Romance. The Love Bunglers. Remember those underground comics I talked about? One of the most popular was written by Jaime Hernandez. The series is called Love and Rockets. It's been going on for 30 years now. The same characters. They've aged in real time. And this is the love story of, and it's so real. Teen love, then we go on, we love everyone else, and then they come back into our life. Seems like a relatable story, huh? Another romance, my favorite series of all time, written by Terry Moore. It's called Strangers in Paradise. This is not only romance, it's everything. It's intrigue, it's a thriller, it's a comedy, but at its heart, it's the love of Cashew and Francine. Two outcasts, and Francine is doing everything she could not to fall in love with her best friend Cashew. And it's a beautiful story. It would be such a great TV series. There's so much crap out there. I wish that they would do this. Next genre after romance is sci-fi. This is an amazing book called Punk Rock Jesus. Now we say, when this was written, like, oh, that could never happen. Well, what if those who want power took DNA from the Shroud of Turin, inserted it into a virgin, and then said, we have Jesus. And then what if that kid was like, I don't want to be Jesus. The best-selling comic book of all time, Jason Aaron, who I talked about with Scalped. Marvel Comics gave him Star Wars. Marvel owns Star Wars now. Well, Disney owns all of it. And Jason Aaron said, well, I'm not going to retell the Star Wars stories. Everybody knows those. The first 12 issues, first 4 collected in this, take place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Then the next ones take place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Best-selling comic of all time was Star Wars #1 by Jason Aaron and John Cassidy. The art is fantastic. The storytelling is smart. If you love Star Wars, if you know people love Star Wars, get in this book. The last one is by a biography. Remember I talked about the Tony winner? This is Funhouse by Alison Bechdel. It was made into a musical. It won the Tony Award. This book has won every literary award that there is, not for comics, for literature. This is the story of a young woman coming to terms with her sexuality, her father's sexuality. Father was a mortician and an English teacher. This is a real story. And if this doesn't touch you, it'll touch you. This is an important book right now, folks. This is an important book to put in the hands of people. There, you can look this book up and there are page after page of court cases trying to ban this book. It's called Fun Home by Alison Bechtel. I can guarantee the Washington Pavilion won't have this show. But they should. I've rambled, I've talked, I'm sorry, I'm over time. I get really passionate about this because literature is literature. Reading and knowledge take us out of poverty, take us out of desolation, take us out of addiction, take us out of fear, out of PTSD, and give us hope. I'll answer any questions you have after the fact because I know some of y'all have to go. But if you want to look at the books, if you want to talk to me, I got nothing to do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.